Should we talk about the mega-dinghy that arrived on Monday? It was 230 illegal migrants, more than a standard EasyJet flight, more than the capacity for a Boeing 737. There's been lots of flippant commentary, including by myself, that finally he's discovered a solution to the small boats crisis, but really this is quite a serious issue. Tom, what are your thoughts?
I hadn't thought about it that way. He has overnight solved the small boats crisis by ushering in the big boats crisis. They'll be on ferries next. I mean, where do you start with this? The shocking numbers is one thing. I mean, it's also the way in which it kind of smashed the previous record of only a few weeks ago by a pretty fair margin. I think the last biggest boat that made the crossing successfully was 160 people, and that was only at the end of July. I suppose, when I first saw those images, I thought it was like AI. I thought this was something that, one of my uncles would accidentally believe and share around a WhatsApp group without thinking. And yet it was actually in all its glory there, the mega-dinghy. Of course, the government will say, understandably so, that crossings are down by 42% from where they were last year. But at the same time, it's clearly just the fact that the kind of people smuggling trade is reacting to those restrictions such as they are that have been put in place. They are launching from other parts of the French coast. They are getting their hands on these much bigger vessels because of the fact that the kind of supply chains for the smaller ones has clearly been disrupted to a degree, but it's only to a degree and will only be for a certain amount of time as well. And also a big deciding factor in a lot of this is the weather and the conditions, as long as they continue to be as they are, I'm sure those numbers will continue to climb. And just taking the fact that we're still talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people making this crossing in broad daylight and not seemingly deterred is something that would have been absolutely shocking to anyone if you'd mentioned this to them 15 or 20 years ago. So it's an admission of failure, certainly. And it's a sign that really the small boats problem will just kind of waft and wane in its tactics and in its vessels and in its extremity until you really go after the source of the problem, which is making sure that you can detain and deport people regardless of what the ECHR or the Refugee Convention says, and that also you remove those pull factors that exist that make people think that, even though it's £2,000 for a very precarious seat on one of these mega dinghies, it's probably worth it because of what I'll be able to get on the other end and the pretty low likelihood that I'll ever be deported, provided I say the right things and rip up the right documents. Until you solve all of that, you can pat yourself on the back for the numbers being slightly lower, but it's going to continue to be a problem, obviously.
Candice, what did you make of the migrant cruise liner that burst on Monday?
Yeah, it's so true, right? Like you think something like that is AI. that I sort of, every now and again when I log into my Facebook feed comes up. It's like, yeah, absolutely. I think that this is what Labour were warned about. You cannot, the human traffickers are sort of like a multi-headed hydra. You cut one head off and a few more will emerge. They will always find ways to adapt to the environment. So you can't just tackle them, which is what Keir Starmer tried to do, the supply side of the issue. You also have to tackle the demand side of the issue, which is what the Rwanda scheme was trying to address, as well as the Illegal Migration Act. And that sends the message out to migrants themselves that the chances of actually getting in and being able to claim asylum are very, very, very low. The human traffickers are always incentivized financially to keep going, to keep finding new methods as long as there are people willing to pay. So you could never just look at that side of the equation. But Labour very foolishly did. And this is the result. They're just becoming more and more and more brazen.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, poll after poll has shown that migration really is it's the one big burning issue in British politics, Tom, as you said, along with cost of living. I mean, it's convenient for Burnham to talk about devolving powers. Alas, this is one power that he can't devolve. As we've touched on, incredibly small beer, like hard to cancel subscriptions. But his ability to solve this issue, or as it's seeming much more likely, not solve this issue, will be the measure of him. I think it will incinerate his political career as it has done many of his predecessors if he's unable to get to grips with it.
No, it certainly feels that way. And I think part of the reason this has become such a flashpoint issue is because aside from clearly the status quo, tens of thousands of people every year coming into the country illegally by small boat, regardless, not even talking about people who are coming via lorries and all the rest of it, that hasn't gone away either. Or people just overstaying visas, which is obviously the main way in which people kind of continue to stay in the country illegally. Anyone who hasn't been trained out of common sense realizes that that is a problem for all the reasons that we're reading about in the newspapers day to day, because of how many of these characters turn out to be deeply unsavory criminals. But aside from anything else, I think it's become the kind of key example of people's sense of powerlessness over politics. You can vote for successive Conservative governments to get a hold on the border, both in terms of legal and illegal migration. And if anything, the problem gets worse. If anything, they preside over sky-high levels of both legal and illegal immigration. It gets to the heart of the ability of government to act and to do anything. Even if you're the Labour Party, you now have to at least pretend when the election comes around that you think immigration is too high and you're going to do something about it. And yet, through a mix of the dysfunctions of the civil service in the state, as well as the fact that a lot of people in politics deep down don't really want to do anything about this because they do see it as distasteful in the way that Candice was describing earlier, nothing ever happens. It feels like the public, when they go to the ballot box, are pulling a particular lever saying we need to get on a hold of this. And if anything, the problem gets worse. So that's one of the reasons why it's so supercharged. It's almost not just the issue itself. It's also what it represents about people's sense of powerlessness in the face of clearly malign changes, which they're apparently powerless to stop. And into the government that can show that they're serious about this and deliver on it, I think the future sort of belongs to them. Really, it's so crucial for how many people are thinking about politics.
You're right. There was sort of a grim foreboding of what might be to come when Angela Rayner, I think it was, in response to the mega-dinghy said, look, these are women, these are children, all of the usual platitudes about needing to sort of tone down the rhetoric.
They call them small boats or however large you want to say. They're not, in most cases, seaworthy vessels, and they're putting innocent lives at risk, and we've got to crack that and we've got to stop that from happening.
Do you understand there's another emotion many people feel, not just, as it were, sympathy, empathy with the people on board and the risk they face? It is rage.
Well, these are desperate, vulnerable people getting into these vessels that are dangerous, and we've got to stop that.
I mean, obviously that was an insult to anyone's intelligence, which I think is most of the country by now who saw the pictures of it. But Burnham is now at the heart of this irreconcilable conflict that Labour has tried to straddle for some time now. The Labour Party, as you're right, it really does see this issue as distasteful. It really doesn't want to sort of, as they say, try and reform on immigration. But fixing it is the overwhelming priority of the British people, unless he sort of pins his colours to the mast. Then he's in a fair amount of trouble, I think. Candice, do you have any last thoughts?
I agree with you. I don't know, there's something very Marie Antoinette-ish about Andy Burnham. I mean, he's sort of, in his version of Versailles, no idea what's happening in the rest of the country. Only when the, angry mob arrives at the gates will he finally realise just what a fantasy world he lives in.